It was the spring of 1981, and 17-year-old Linda Singh, like many of her fellow teens, had a job working at the mall.
The name of the pretzel shop was Barbarian Pretzel, located in Frederick, Maryland, in Francis Scott Key Mall, which is still there. And the only thing that we sold really was pretzels and drinks, but pretzels mainly.
But unlike most teens, Linda's job wasn't after school or on the weekends. It was full-time and the only thing she had to survive. She had recently left her parents' home after a major blow-up.
I had already dropped out of high school. I didn't really have a secure home. So I would stay with friends. Sometimes I'd rent a room if I had enough money. A lot of times I would just, sleep wherever I could.
One day, while taking a lunch break from her job, she ran into someone at the mall, a recruiter for the Maryland National Guard.
They used to go in and set up a recruiting table in the mall. And, people would walk by, you try to give them information, right? So I went on break to actually get some lunch, and I was just walking around the mall. And the recruiter stopped me to talk to me, and he was like, have you, heard about the National Guard? And I was like, what? He's like, we're part of the military. It's the Army National Guard. And I'm just like, yeah, no, I don't think so. And so when on my way back, he stopped me. And so I started, just looking at the information and kind of listening to him.
But Linda figured her status as a high school dropout would preclude her from even being considered.
And he convinced me that if I could pass the ASVAB test with a good enough score, that he could probably get me a waiver for my education piece of it. And I was just like, really? And so he says, why don't you just at least come in and take the ASVAB? And so I decided, you know what? I had nothing else better going for me at the time.
So she took the test, passed with flying colors. And that recruiter, he got her the waiver he promised he would. And with that, Linda Singh began her career in the Maryland National Guard, overcoming many obstacles over the span of a 38-year career that culminated as the Adjutant General, its top position. She thrived in the role. And shortly after she was sworn in, she looked up that mall recruiter.
I actually called him, and he was like freaked out, like, why is the general calling me? And I said, were you ever a recruiter in Frederick? And he said, for about 2 months. And he goes, why? Did I do something wrong? And I go, no, I really wouldn't consider it doing anything wrong. I said, I wanted to thank him for saving my life. At that time, I would have to say that I was struggling and trying to figure out how could I get out of kind of that situation that I was in. I'd been put out of my home, and it was just a really tough situation. And I had hopes and dreams of going to college, and, his recruiting me and really convincing me to sign up for the National Guard probably saved my life.
In today's episode, our hosts sit down with Major General Singh to discuss how she was able to overcome numerous obstacles over the course of her career, go through some of the highlights of her service, and hear about the best parts of living in Maryland. Oh, and one final thought on that mall job.
I still to this day love Barbarian pretzels, like the salted pretzels with mustard.
I'm Carrie Varohaikis, and this is Army Matters.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Leslie C. Smith, and welcome to Army Matters. I'm here today with my best buddy, my good friend,
the 15th Sergeant Major of the Army, retired, of course, Dan Dailey. How are you doing today, Les?
I'm doing good, Blue Eyes. How are you?
Oh, that's just the blue eye thing's killing me, man.
But do you have blue eyes or not?
I do.
Okay, and that good looking blue eyes. You got a little white spot in the top of your head. Where does that come from?
My mom gave that to me.
Did she have one in the top of her head?
She did.
She did?
And one of my brothers has it too.
Really?
Yeah.
For those who of us can't see us, Dan has a little white patch in the top of his head, and he's had it for as long as I've known him. Dan, explain that to me, brother. What is it?
It's a non-dominant trait, we believe, of what is called Wardenburg's disease.
Okay. Can you explain that briefly? What does that mean?
So the skin there has no pigment in it. So it produces hair with no pigment. And it's traditionally passed on by a mother to male siblings. And traditionally 50% of the siblings will have that. And exactly 50% of us do.
Okay.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So Dan, I got some questions for you.
Yes.
So when I say the word Maryland, Maryland to you, what's the first thing that you think of?
Crabs.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing?
Well, I think that, like, because I always see it on people's cars. They got like these crab logo things for Maryland.
Crab logos, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about you? What do you think?
I think about Francis Scott Key.
The Key Bridge? Or just and the Star Spangled Banner.
Yes.
Yes.
And, I was stationed in Aberdeen Proving Ground twice.
Oh, well then, you know what we should do? We should test your Maryland facts.
What? Hold on now.
Yeah, wait, I wasn't stationed there.
Is
you
that
were.
it? Okay, all right, go ahead. Give it to me.
You should have some residential knowledge.
I should. Not that I spent a lot of time there. I was always going, but go ahead.
Were you or were you not a temporary resident of Maryland?
I was for 4 years. You're absolutely right.
Then here we go.
Okay.
Question number 1.
Dune.
What is the state bird of Maryland?
It's an Oriole.
Very good.
Baltimore Orioles, baby. Woo,
you're up 1. All right,
okay.
Ready? Question number 2.
Okay.
What is the current population of Maryland?
Ooh. I would say probably maybe 2.5 million.
I have no idea, but
you just want to ask that anyway? Really?
Yes,
okay, is that where we're going?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where we're
trying
going.
to stump the chump game? Okay. Right. All right.
But did you like your time there?
I loved it. And it was a unique time in the Army because of and actually the Maryland population is 6.23 million people.
6.23 million.
Okay.
So Les, the reason why we're talking about this is because we have the former Adjutant General of the great state of Maryland in the studio with us today. As the Inspector General, what was one of your interactions with her and the other Adjutant Generals?
I think it may have been at a conference, but I know I came up and did a leadership professional development session with her when she was the Adjutant General with her leaders. Mm. And I was like, yeah, she's got it going on. And you could tell when you walk into the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I walk into the room, like, yeah, they got it going on.
Well, she's here to tell us her story. And we're here to honor her incredible service. Let's bring her on.
Yeah. So, Dr. Major General Linda Singh, welcome to Army Matters.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So, Dr. Singh, again, we'd like to keep it light when we start off the show. So we got some questions to spark the interest that I think of our listeners would be the best way to say it. So you lived your entire life in Maryland. What is one thing about Maryland that you'd like to share with our listeners that they may not be aware of?
Well, depending on where they're from, they may not realize that we have the best crab cakes. Hands down.
Crab cakes. I love crab cakes.
Crab cakes are amazing here in Maryland.
Yeah.
Yes, I concur with that. So what's your favorite thing about the state? Other than the crab cakes?
Well, I love that we have multi-seasons.
Okay.
Except for I'm a little tired of the cold right now. I'd like it to be a little bit warmer.
Okay. What's the least favorite thing you like?
The pollen.
Oh,
the pollen.
Okay. So let's jump to like where you're from, and we've been to some of these places that we're going to talk about. So I can just see Dr. Major General Linda Singh being reared up in Frederick County, Maryland. And you lived in a house with no indoor plumbing.
That's correct.
Tell us about your upbringing and how did that help you as a young person growing up?
Well, growing up in Frederick County, I actually lived in the middle of nowhere. It's still pretty much in the middle of nowhere. My grandparents raised me from 3 months old until I was 9. So my grandmother and grandfather had 17 kids at birth, and 3 died very young. So they raised 14 kids plus me.
Wow.
We had a huge family, if you can imagine. All of my uncles were like my brothers, except for some of the older ones, which, they were not living at home when I was there, but all the younger ones were like brothers and sisters. But then I grew up with a lot of guys. So my grandparents, they had 2 daughters. The rest were all boys.
Wow.
And so I played basketball, I played soccer, I played football. I learned how to box very early on. So Muhammad Ali was like one of my favorites. I always tried to emulate that. But, growing up in a house with no indoor plumbing and running water, I never really thought about it. I just thought that was the way it was supposed to be until I started going and visiting other places. And I'm like, oh, they have indoor plumbing. We don't. I don't think I ever told anyone that we didn't have indoor plumbing. I didn't get a chance to have sleepovers and things like that with any of the kids from school because I just didn't want to bring anybody home. And so it's not that I was ashamed. It's just we were pretty maxed out. When you're in a 4-room house and you want to bring somebody home for a sleepover, it's like, where are they going to sleep? So it's just, not feasible. But we, grew up in a very loving house. And I think that formed a lot of who I am today. And it really helped me realize that when I actually did, join the Army, it was home for me. Like I was a country girl. I liked going out and, spending all day outside in the woods. I spent a lot of time in the woods. And so I really think that formed kind of that foundation. So then when I actually went to basic training, I was like, I could get used to this. Like, I really like this. I like being able to do all the things that I grew up doing.
So you were the youngest of everyone?
I was the youngest.
So did your older brothers take care of you, or did they like, hey, we're gonna toughen her up?
They did both.
Okay.
They would tease me, so I would get teased a lot. They would, try to really, just toughen me up. I mean, I hung right with them. And I think if you asked any of the ones that are still living today, they will tell you, this is our baby sister, and she's a tough girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Dr. Singh, at the age of 16, you actually experienced an incident of sexual assault, which led to you leaving your home. Can you share the circumstances around that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I went to a party, and my oldest brother, who happened to be home from the military, is my half brother, and I did not grow up around him. And so he took me to the party, and I had a little bit of beer. And a little bit of beer for someone that's young is probably a lot of beer. And so when we came back home that evening, I had went into my room to go to sleep and woke up and found, my oldest brother in my bed. I will tell you that I didn't know what to do at that moment. I was like in shock. This can't be happening, because I looked up to him, right? Like he was like a hero to me. And so then he left a couple of days later. I told my parents. And I thought that they would be a lot more responsive. Initially, they were. And then it ended up getting into really a huge argument between me and my mom. My mom, was an alcoholic. And she started just calling me names. And she called me a whore. She told me that, I probably encouraged it. And my dad got mad. So they got into a huge argument. And, and I told her that it was not my fault. It was her son's fault. And we just had a huge, huge argument. And so my dad ended up holding my mom back because she was going to pound on me. I think it would have been an all-out fight. And he told me that I needed to leave. That was the last day that I lived at home.
At what point were you confident enough to talk about this publicly?
I was not able to really talk about it until after I came back from Afghanistan.
Okay.
So you're talking years. I had not really shared it with anyone. I mean, I made a decision when I was in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's also where I found out I was going to put in my packet for general officer. And I felt like I wanted people to know my story. And it wasn't that I was asking for people to feel sorry for me, because I didn't need them to feel sorry for me, but I wanted them to understand that I didn't come through the traditional path. I didn't graduate from an Ivy League school. I didn't go to one of the service academies. I mean, I was barely surviving. And I wanted people to know that, right? And I wanted them to know that you can come from many different backgrounds and still be able to have a level of success.
So as we heard in the opening, a year after you left your home, you joined the National Guard. What was that first year in the Guard like for you?
My first years were very tough, and tough in the sense that you have to think about, I didn't have really a stable home. So when I went away to basic training, and at the time AIT, that was great because I was getting 3 squares a day. So I was getting my meals. I, had a place to stay. And, when I left basic training, I cried because everybody else was going home on break and I didn't have a home to go to. So I just went to the next station early.
So let me ask you, Linda, did anybody in your command know when you were in basic training that you didn't have a place to live?
No.
Okay. You didn't tell
because
them?
I became the senior squad leader over like 40 females. So I was like the tough person. And, I felt like, I didn't need to share with them my problems and challenges. And I think, when I was crying when everybody else was leaving and I was saying goodbye to everybody else, the drill sergeant, he had asked, and I just said, well, I'm not going home. And he just thought that I wasn't going home.
Wow. What was your MOS? What did you enlist to be?
Well, initially, and then the change comes. I initially enlisted to be a 26 Charlie, which was radar repair.
Oh, radar repair. Wow.
Radar repair. Okay. And
I ended up ultimately being in personnel.
Join AUSA, the Army's premier professional association and host of the largest land power exposition in the United States. AUSA is open to everyone, including all ranks and components. So whether you have a relationship with the U.S. Army or simply want to honor those who serve, you can learn more online at ausa.org/join.
Welcome back to Army Matters. Now, Dr. Singh, you were in the Army for 30 plus years, and during that time you had 2 deployments to combat. What would you say is the biggest thing you learned during those deployments?
I think my first deployment was pretty monumental because I was the Division G4, so I was the logistics officer in charge of all the logistics for a 1,600 person deployment. And that may not, sound like a lot, but that was 1,600 from like 26 different states. And we had to get them from home station to MOB station, from MOB station into Germany for our mobilization exercise, right, our readiness exercise, and then into Kosovo. And then we had to reverse that on the other end. And at the same time, I was actually in the distance learning Army War College piece. And I tried to get leadership to let me delay it. And all the generals, as they were talking about me, as I'm like standing there and trying to get them to be like, I think I need to delay this because I'm going to have all this responsibility. And they were like, no, you're going to do it. And you need to stay on target. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I left my civilian job very early to come on deployment early because I had so much to do. And so I stayed away from my civilian job for 18 months during that deployment. And to me, it was successful. My team was great. We did a number of different things, but I was the logistics officer for the whole multinational task force East in Kosovo.
Wow. What was your civilian job at the time?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
I was working at Accenture. Accenture is a global consulting company, and so I was working there at the time.
That's amazing. So the skills that you learned in the military, how did they help Accenture or any other company that you worked for prior to that time?
Well, I think the biggest transition was once I became an officer, because I went back to branch qualification school as an ordnance officer. I ended up getting a job right after that working on the reserve component automation system and focusing on the logistics modules. And then when they realized I had a personnel background, I started focusing on the personnel modules. That gave me a huge lift. And as that I continued to grow skills and things in the military. I started working mainly in Department of Defense. I mean, I was working on teams that was doing modularization way back when. And I was on the civilian side, but yet also, in the National Guard. And so I think it really helped me to understand the client that I was working with. And it made it so that I could walk in and have a conversation very different than anyone else because I knew the lingo, right? I could understand what we were trying to accomplish. And that made me happy, right? Like I loved it when all of those pieces came together.
Who would you say, other than Les Smith, was one of your biggest mentors? and what big impact did they have on you?
I wouldn't have said this when I was early on because I just didn't understand that that's what he was trying to do. He's one of the former adjutant generals that was in the state of Maryland, James Frederick. And I bring him up because I watched him, for a number of years. He was like one of our longest standing adjutant generals. I had like a fear of this guy. Everybody had a fear of him. But he selected me for certain roles, giving me an opportunity. And I felt like they were setting me up for failure, but it really was an opportunity. And when I became the adjutant general, he still would call me. If we did something, really well or something, went well, he would send me a handwritten note. And him and I became very close. Like I really appreciated his honesty. I appreciated him sharing with me knowledge, but yet allowing me to lead and him not trying to step in and still be the leader, but him giving me that level of advice. And that's something that I don't think I could ever replace. He was there when I needed him to be.
So, it's very, very hard to make general officer, period. But I would say it's even harder to become a general officer in the National Guard. Can you describe, not necessarily the process, but how you felt when you got the notice that you were going to get selected for being a general officer?
When I got the notice that my packet was going in, I was in Afghanistan. And the challenge is you have to pull together all this stuff. And I'm just like, I have no idea how am I going to do that being in Afghanistan. I had to do a physical. I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to do that. So I had to have, conversations. I had just came back from being on leave and it kind of hit me. I was a little startled because by my kind of calculation, I didn't think I was going to be asked to put forth a packet for another couple of years. I think that's a good thing, right? Because you're not expecting it and then you're asked to put in a packet. You're right. There's not many of us and there's not many females for sure. It's definitely more heavily male dominated in the Guard at that senior level. It's, I hate to say very much the boys' club, right? But when I think about the Guard, it's still very heavily that way. And you have to be able to be a leader that people respect, that people want to follow, and that they're not going to look at you and say, well, you're selected because you're a female. Like I was a tough leader and I wanted people to show up every single day. And I didn't care whether you were male, female, black, white, it doesn't matter to me, but you better show up because I'm going to treat everyone the same and I'm going to have the same level of expectation. And that's what I expected from me. I wanted to just be able to get a seat at the table, be asked to put in for these roles, giving that opportunity. And so when I got the chance to put in for general officer, I realized that I wanted people to see me as a leader, but I wanted them to know that if I become general, I wanted to be a soldier's general, because I know what it's like to be down at that private E1 level being asked to do X, Y, and Z. And I wanted them to know that.
So we talk a lot here about mistakes and how we learn from them.
Les makes a lot of them too.
Yeah, every day.
Makes every day.
Every day is a mistake coming to hang out with Dan. But, what would you say is the biggest mistake that you made in your career? And what is the lesson that you learned from that?
The biggest mistake I think I made, other than not showing up for drill because I had to work, because I did get,
That's a good one.
I did get dinged. There in my early years, it was a choice between showing up for drill or working or not having a babysitter. So that was tough until I could really get it together. But I don't know if it's necessarily more of a mistake that I'd kind of say that this was, but I missed a huge opportunity because I just couldn't see through how it would work.
So did you say you overthought it?
I transferred to a military intelligence unit because I wanted to be an MI officer, I thought. And then I rethought that. But when I transferred to that particular unit, and right at the time that I was going through the boarding for officer candidate school, they wanted to send me to language school. And I was a single parent at that time. And I didn't see how I would be able to go to language school and take care of my kid. And I wish someone would have sat down with me and said, that's like a TDY move. Like, you can take your child, because it was a long school. They wanted me to actually go into Arabic is where they wanted me to go to.
Oh my gosh.
And they made me go through all the testing, and they really wanted me to go. And to me, I was so focused on, I'm a single parent. I don't know how this would work. I have no idea. I just couldn't see how to make it work. And no one understood that enough to have a conversation with me to say, here's how this would look.
Yeah. So, ma'am, you ended up being the first woman to serve as the Adjutant General of Maryland National Guard. And what was your biggest accomplishment? And also, how many other women actually served as tags? It's got to be very few, right?
Well, now there are more, but at the time that I made Adjutant General, I think I was the third.
The third? Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
I think I was the third. There was one in California. There was another one she was in one of the other states. And then right within the year that I made Adjutant General, there's like 6 more that came up. I'm just like, wow, okay, this is great. That doesn't happen a lot. And I didn't realize that I was only the second African American female to make Adjutant General, one of the few. And at the time, there were only 5 of us initially. And then, we ended up getting a few more.
So one final question. How did the Army help you achieve your goals?
Oh my gosh. I wouldn't have gotten my first degree. I would not have gotten my first house. I wouldn't have had the strength to really just live the Army values, because the values made so much sense to me. It was what I grew up with. And so I've lived the Army values. And I think it just really gave me this ability, I hate to say this, but, putting on that uniform gave me a level of confidence that I still don't get, not necessarily when I put on a suit, right? It's just something about the uniform that when you put it on, you're standing tall, you're looking good. It just gives you this ability to say, I can go out and do anything.
Yeah.
and know that you're ready to do anything.
Now that's actually a good way to close. Thank you for your incredible service, ma'am, and your sacrifice to this great nation, to the state of Maryland. It's a privilege to talk with you. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks both of you. I really appreciate your service as well.
Many of our guests talk about the importance of family in their lives. In today's Chapter Spotlight, we highlight a recent event created by the Fort Leonard Wood Mid-Missouri branch that celebrated military families. On February 28th, the chapter hosted a military family night out, held at the local Culver's restaurant, a valuable AUSA community partner. The event featured free food and drinks for over 120 military families, giving them a chance to relax and meet other people. The event, which was co-sponsored by the local USO, also featured family trivia, which we understand was quite competitive and fun. Kudos to everyone at the chapter for the event and for continuing to support local soldiers and their families. If you or your chapter would like to be profiled on the show, please email us at podcast@ausa.org.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Anthony Del Call is the producer and writer, and Andy Bosnack is the supervising sound editor. Ellen Toner is the content editor. Unzinga Curry is the executive producer, and the senior producers are Carrie Barrow-Heckes and LaSharon Duncan. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with the search of the word Reef. AUSA's Army Matters podcast primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. I'm LaSharon Duncan. Hope you have a great Army Day. Hooah!